What's up, everybody? My name is Demetri Kofinas, and you're listening to Hidden Forces, a podcast that inspires investors, entrepreneurs, and everyday citizens to challenge consensus narratives and to learn how to think critically about the systems of power shaping our world. My guest in today's episode, which was originally made available to premium subscribers only, is James Block. James is the author of Dirty Bubble Media, a substack and Twitter account that publishes critical thought pieces about the crypto industry and which was recently featured in an article published by The Atlantic titled "Crypto Was Always Smoke and Mirrors." This conversation is awesome. It's the first episode I've done on the fallout stemming from the bankruptcy of FTX and the collapse of the Luna ecosystem that begins to tell the larger story of what I think is really going on here. You can gain access to our premium content library, which includes early releases to episodes like this one, subscriber-only episodes, transcripts, and intelligence reports by going to hiddenforces.io/subscribe. All of our content tiers give you access to our premium feed, which you can listen to on your phone using your favorite podcast app, just like you're listening to this episode right now. If you want to join in on the conversation and become a member of the Hidden Forces Genius community, which includes Q&A calls with guests, access to special research and analysis, in-person events, and dinners, you can also do that at hiddenforces.io/subscribe. And if you still have questions, feel free to send an email to info@hiddenforces.io, and I or someone from our team will get right back to you. And with that, please enjoy this incredibly timely and illuminating conversation with my guest, James Block. James Block, welcome to Hidden Forces.
Good to be here.
It's great to have you here, James. So you're actually a doctor, right? Actually, it looks like not only you're a doctor, but your research for your medical degree focused on metastatic breast cancer, which makes you perfect to understand what's going on in crypto.
Yeah, I have compared crypto to cancer a few times. Yeah, so my background is more in the sciences. I've always had a fascination with finance and actually really strongly considered doing that for my career, but ended up going into medicine. And then, I completed like a dual degree in both medical degree and a PhD, and I did cancer research for the PhD portion. I'm now studying or training to be a psychiatrist in residency.
So how did someone who studied to be a doctor and who's training to be a psychiatrist end up spending so much time writing thought pieces on what's going on in the crypto industry?
Well, as I mentioned, I've always been interested in finance, and I've always had a particular fascination with financial crimes and fraud. I really don't know why, to be perfectly honest. I think it concerned my family at times when I was so interested in things like Enron and, various Ponzi scams and things, and that I was so focused and so interested in these things. But yeah, it's always just been a weird fascination of mine. So when I discovered crypto and some of the things that were going on in crypto back last year, because before that I had really no interest or involvement in it at all. And I started seeing things that had all of the signs of being classic kind of Ponzi or other type of scams. It was just something that I couldn't resist getting interested in.
So I will have mentioned this in the introduction that both your Twitter account, although the handle on the Twitter account has a different name, the name on the account and the substack that you write on are both called Dirty Bubble Media. Why did you choose that name? I'm curious.
It just popped into my head one day that this wasn't a bubble, it was a dirty bubble because it's full of fraud. And being a millennial, I watched SpongeBob, so it's kind of a double entendre on there being a dirty bubble, and also that's a character in SpongeBob, so it kind of worked out that way. So I was inspired that way, I suppose. Yeah, and also, at the time, and I think still to this day, a lot of people see me as a villain because I try to expose these people, and the ethos in this space is that it's better to keep these things under the rug and not bring them up because they damage the reputation of crypto.
That actually is, I've had the same experience actually. Where I first experienced that was with Tether. There was just a huge cone of silence around that organization And I think that ultimately it did. There's no doubt that it's done a disservice to crypto. And I think, although I was talking to my friend Nathaniel Whitmore yesterday on a one of our Genius member live Q&As about this, and I said that they, people in crypto, ultimately bear responsibility if and when Tether blows up and it has a damaging effect on the space. And he said, well, who is they? And that's a good point too. And it's hard to, the fact is that not everyone in crypto is a scammer. And we can have a conversation as well today, if we have time, on whether or not crypto itself is a quote scam. I think that also goes too far. I think that crypto refers to two categories. One is the technology and the other is the philosophy. And I think because of some unresolved scaling challenges on the technology side, we've seen financial players who've had access to a lot of retail money compromise on the philosophy by creating these centralized secondary layer solutions in the form of exchanges and stablecoins like USDT that have enabled them to capture this financial opportunity while forgetting about the whole project of decentralization, which is what everything was about in the first place. But before we even go down that road, and I do not want to dominate this conversation, I just want to ask you, what are your thoughts on what's going on here?
In terms of what's going on in crypto in general?
Yeah, basically all the stuff that we've been witness to in the last several months in particular, going back to at least the collapse of Luna.
Yeah, I mean, so what you have is a few things. You do have an underlying aspect of financial crime, which is a lot of what this was used for in the past and is still used for to this day in terms of, money laundering and obfuscation and evading capital controls in various countries. Then you have another layer of it, which is, the exploitation or targeting of retail investors by both really bad actors as well as like venture capital firms and the businesses that they've funded within the space. And then on top of that, you, of course, just have the massive amount of speculation that was fueled in part by this kind of insane 0% interest rate environment, which I don't know if has ever existed in history. So it's kind of this perfect confluence of all of these things in one moment. And so that's why part of the reason it's so difficult to understand what's happening in crypto is that all of these different actors are kind of not necessarily, I would say, competitively collaborating, right? Like, an example would be Tether. Tether is its own animal, and it has some very interesting connections to a number of different entities. But the fact is that, say the venture capital firms that have a lot of investments in projects that aren't directly related to Tether, they still have an interest in protecting things like Tether, because if Tether goes down, that seriously damages or outright destroys the entire ecosystem, right? Or like FTX going down, that already is bringing massive regulatory attention, in addition to obviously the first order effects of them going under and taking down a lot of people with them. It turns out that even the people who are honest, and there are honest people in the space who are trying to do the right thing, even they are compromised, because if these things go down, the collateral damage is so great that it might just take out everything with it.
How much of this has stemmed from the collapse of Luna, do you think?
I mean, it's hard to say. The fact is, look at what this was. First of all, look at what Luna was doing. What they were doing was creating fake value on paper. That's all it was, right? You pump a token up into the sky using whatever means necessary, and then you use it to back an ostensibly stable asset against it, and then issue that asset, and you thus basically are leveraging one zero value token to create something of supposed value. People fell for that, which is, it's astounding because it was such an obvious problem. And this idea that somehow you could algorithmically maintain the value of this thing in the absence of any demand for the underlying token, which was Luna's, is obscene. But it also turns out, and I've taken to calling these things flywheel schemes because it relates back to one of the companies that's collapsed as a result of building their business around these types of quote unquote tokenomic schemes, which was Celsius. They're all doing that, right? This is what FTX was doing with FTT, right? You create this token out of thin air. You use whatever means necessary to, manipulate its price in a supposedly free market, and then say, look, we have this thing that's worth something, and then you use it as collateral, or you mark it on your balance sheet and show your investors, and then investors say, hey, look at all the money they have, we're going to give them even more. Or you show it to retail and say, look, we have all this money, we're going to issue a stable coin based against it, right? It's the same scheme over and over and over again. So it's not so much that Luna was the problem. I mean, Luna was the first to collapse because it was perhaps the dumbest and the most precarious of the various scams, but they're all doing the same thing. So that's what the entire space is based off of, is massive leverage backed by essentially nothing. Exactly. It's backed by nothing. And it's a unique, it has elements of like a pump and dump type scheme, but the difference is that they're not only pumping and dumping something, they're pumping it and then borrowing against it. Right? Which like you couldn't even do in a traditional financial market, because who's going to lend against the stock of, say, like AMC or something, right? Like, I mean, somebody might do it, but like, it's crazy. It really is. They're recapitulating every mistake of financial markets from like the 20s, and they're speedrunning it in like a year. It actually is incredible to watch this happen.
Yeah, no, totally. And I want to focus in on something you said. You said competitive collaboration, I think is the term you used.
Yeah.
I want to focus in on that because I do think that that's accurate. And that opens the door to questions about conspiracies and criminal conspiracies. And we know that Sam Bankman-Fried has been indicted by or whatever the term is, charged by is it the SDNY that charged him with criminal conspiracy, and the SEC and CFTC charged him with what?
Well, the SEC is civil. So I think SEC and CFTC both filed civil charges, and then the New York prosecutors, federal prosecutors filed criminal charges. So he's been charged by everybody simultaneously. But yeah, to get back to the idea of there being collaboration or a conspiracy here, we know that there is for certain, because actually there's a New York Times, I believe it was New York Times. There was a major publication recently that released chat logs from a chat that was between all these different major exchange operators, including both CZ and Sam. Mm-hmm. These guys are coordinating with each other in spite of the fact that they are ostensibly competitors. They are working together. I've seen people compare it to, like, I think you actually said it, the Chicago Commission, or like the
Chicago Commission, yeah.
Right, or like Lucky Luciano, right? Like the old school mafiosos, right? Like they were working together, even though if they had an opportunity to knock out somebody else and take their stuff, they would. But there's also this level of collaboration that's happening in order to protect their industry. But then on top of that, so you have this like first order collaboration that's direct and planned and conspiratorial. But then you have the second layer of collaboration, which is the indirect one, which is what I was alluding to. So like, for example, I don't know, Coinbase or something. Like Coinbase, like, to disclose, I'm short Coinbase for various reasons, but I don't think that they're engaging in any outright like fraudulent behavior necessarily. I don't think that they're involved with coordinating things like Binance and FTX apparently were, but they still have certain interests in protecting the space, right? Like Sam going down is not good for them regardless. So everybody in this industry has an interest in preventing these things from getting any bigger than they have. And if you look, I don't watch the news much, but like I have family members who do, and they've been telling me that everything they've been seeing on the major news networks are all these crypto people coming out of the woodwork to say, look, Sam was the only bad actor. Everything else is okay, guys. He was just the exception to the rule. Everything's fine. Please don't look any more closely at this. We're good. We're not going to hurt anybody. We're just here to help you. And, the fact that they're allowing people to go on the media and say these things is ridiculous, because Sam is just one of many. And we're going to find that out. We already are finding that out, but we're going to find that out more and more in the next few weeks and months here.
Totally. That's actually something else I want to ask you, which is if you've seen anyone put together a flow chart in real time and updating it on who all the different counterparties are in the space. I'm just curious, answer that for me. And then I want to actually continue on this point about competitive collaboration, because I think this is where the most interesting avenue of conversation is.
So in terms of counterparties, like counterparties specific to FTX?
Yeah, so like we've had, like, for example, one of the things that I've tried to do is to plot out, and I haven't done it like by creating a flow chart. I've just done it over time as I've been researching this and doing episodes on it, which is the spread, the contagion, like how it started, where it started, and how it's moved, how it's progressed throughout the industry, and who are the potential counterparties that are going to blow up next as a result of it. So Binance has suspended withdrawals of USDC. Edwin Dorsey, another person.
Them.
When did they do that? Just now?
Recently. So it looks like what they did. So they have their own stablecoin called BUSD, which is issued by a company called Paxos, which is based in New York, and a regulated business that appears to be legitimate and appears to have the reserves backing in the token. So it's worth saying that. The market cap of BUSD dropped by about $3 billion, and then, or $2.5 or $3 billion. And then USDC issued a $2.5, $3 billion. And then Binance received a couple $1 billion in USDC recently. So they basically just exchanged some of their tokens out for one for another. obviously some of this is off chain because there has to be real dollars exchanging hands somewhere.
A lot of interesting points to bring up. I also think these guys are lucky that there's no easy way to short a lot of these different cryptocurrencies or exchange stable coins without actually taking on exchange-related risk in crypto.
That is exactly. So that's why, I have never bought, sold, traded, touched crypto. I'm fairly conservative financially myself, but yeah, that's the biggest problem is the counterparty risk, right? Like you can't, you could have been shorting Tether on FTX and then FTX goes down, right? I've spoken to people in finance who were considering shorting Tether using Genesis, which was a sort of an over-the-counter exchange that everyone considered to be totally solid, and they just froze withdrawals as well, right? So yeah, the counterparty risk in crypto is off the charts. And part of the reason for that is that there is no segregation between customer assets and exchange assets, right? Like it's all commingled. And like even Coinbase has admitted that. Like legally, these are considered like if the company, like say if Coinbase went bankrupt, it's not clear, and it probably is the case that all of the assets, including the customer's assets that are sitting in the exchanges like quote unquote deposits, are considered company assets. And then customers are just unsecured depositors or unsecured lenders. And then good luck trying to get your money back.
Yeah. So like for super nerds, I went through the SEC complaint as well as a number of other documents and included relevant quotes in the intelligence report. And you can see there, like, it wasn't just that they were commingled. I mean, there was no controls at the company whatsoever. I mean, what happened over at FTX is really astounding. When I was reading through both the complaint, primarily the complaint, the SEC complaint, I felt like I was watching one of those episodes of Breaking Bad where every like few minutes you're like, oh no, you just Walter White keep doubling down on one bad decision after another. And it's hard not to read that document and not feel anxious with just the disaster that was going on over there.
So, yeah. And I mean, my opinion, and this is based just off of my observations and speculation, is that just because we don't have the records doesn't mean there weren't records, that the money disappeared and that some people definitely got the money. So, we're only seeing part of the picture here. There's a lot of, it's gross mismanagement, no question, but there's also a lot of just outright theft, I think, happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're going to find out. I think, we're going to find out a lot. I don't know what will be missing from the picture. Also, the involvement of his parents. I've said this from the beginning that his parents were involved. It's not that, I don't mean that his parents were like running a fraud, but his parents are compliance lawyers. Like there was no way that they were spending so much time in the Bahamas, just living in these multi-million-dollar homes, helping Sam shore up his image, blah, blah, blah. These guys aren't stupid. They've seen tons of stuff. They've studied frauds as part of their job. I just don't believe that even the fact that it was their son could make them blind from this. I think maybe they could be blind to it after the fact because it's a coping mechanism, but I don't think that they were blind to it. I think that doesn't mean that I think that they knew just what he was doing, because I think if you're a compliance lawyer, you'd be crazy to let your son do all this kind of insane shit, but I think that at the very least, my sense is that at the very least, they were happy to play the role of helping him solidify his empire, build a regulatory moat around FTX, understanding how the game is played. So let's go back to this thing about competitive collaboration, which I really love. Because competitive collaboration is actually another way of talking about oligopoly, right? That's what we mean when we talk about antitrust. When we talk about the kind of oligopolies that we saw in the late 19th and early 20th century. And that's what happens in completely unregulated markets. What we have is either tacit or explicit collusion. Now, here we're talking about tacit collusion, or actually we're talking about explicit collusion. Well, let's separate both things out, right? So the tacit collusion is simply what? That the industry in general, it explains the cone of silence around Tether. No one wants to see Tether blow up because they know that some amount, there's a premium in the price of Bitcoin, ETH, and every other currency in the market based on the liquidity that Tether provides, because Tether is dollars that enter. I think the amount of Tethers that have been created have been over time over 100 billion, right? But
it's well over 100 billion, yeah.
And then there's explicit collusion. Talk to me about how you think that these two work. How do you see this in the space?
Well, I mean, the explicit collusion is obvious, and I think becoming ever more obvious every day. I mean, look at the collaboration between FTX, Alameda, and Tether, right? I mean, these are basically, as far as I can tell, one big entity. right? Like we discovered that FTX and Alameda, which were purportedly separate, were in fact the same company and they're indistinguishably linked. I mean, they're the same thing, right? Alameda was FTX's bank account, right? Like, I mean, come on. And you have over 100 companies in this mess that are a part of the bankruptcy, and then a bunch more of entities that aren't included in the bankruptcy and for questionable reasons. And then you have Tether issuing these guys tens of billions of dollars in their stablecoin, and they can't tell you where the money went. Like, what banks did they use to wire the funds? Where did Sam get tens of billions of dollars from to even buy these things, right?
Yeah, almost $37 billion of USDT.
Well, that was up until received. The Protos article, that was up until like October 31st of 2021. So after that, it could have been more. And that's what we know about on chain. There could be other assets that they maybe didn't pick up in their analysis that is not necessarily comprehensive. So this is one big group. And the thing that's funny is that, you know, the more you learn about crypto and all of this stuff, it becomes more and more amazing just how small of a club it really is. Right? If you really get down to it, there's actually a very small group of people that have been involved in this thing for a long time, and their names just keep popping up over and over and over and over and over again. And, you know, clearly there's something going on there, right? Like, it's not just coincidence.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Also, I would say that anecdotally, just from my own, again, this isn't something I've tried to rigorously validate, but just from all the information I've poured over the last few months and over the last few years, the Miami connection, the Miami Caribbean connection is particularly fraught with criminals and scammers. And this is something you and I have talked about, and we talk to a lot of the same folks, and you spend much more time poring over this information than I do, but we've both independently, and we're not the only ones, have come to some sort of sense that what's really happening here is that there is a criminal conspiracy, and that thinking about these companies like Tether or Alameda or Binance as separate entities, while valid, can also be confusing when trying to understand what's really going on here. Because, and this was the example that you were talking about before with respect to the Chicago Commission with the mafia in Chicago and their running of casinos down in Las Vegas. If you were trying to understand the business operations of the casinos in Las Vegas by looking solely at their balance sheets, you wouldn't really understand the decisions that were being made, because millions of dollars were being siphoned out of the basement going into this illicit cartel and this illicit criminal organization. And so I think what I wanted to do with you, James, and I want to see if we can do that here, is to try and help, at the very least, give people a sense of what this framework might look like so they can turn the object in three-dimensional space and look at it from a different perspective. And maybe by doing that, things start to make sense. I'm curious if that resonates with you, how it resonates, and what your sense is of this criminal network and criminal conspiracy and how wide its tentacles reach and how deep it goes.
Yeah, I mean, so this is something that I have been interested in for a while. And obviously, it's not easy to disentangle this, right? Because it's been very well obfuscated and it's very intentionally hidden. So the example that I've used in an article about a month ago to kind of conceptualize what's happening, or at least what I think is happening here, is a scandal that happened about 3 decades ago, was exposed in the early 90s, a bank called the Bank of Commerce and Credit International, or BCCI, which was an international bank that operated initially in Pakistan and then ended up in being in over 79 countries. And ostensibly, this was a very successful bank that was just, what their advantage was is they would go places and do business where nobody else would do it and take risks. And they grew very rapidly. And the parallels between BCCI and I think what's happening in crypto are really astonishing. And even the similarities between that company and like FTX alone are very interesting, right? Like, the founder of this company is this guy who, I think his name is Abedi, was this like considered to be like a genius, and everybody kind of thought of him as being this really great guy. And he managed to insinuate himself into a number of different, very prominent individuals' lives, including Jimmy Carter. And he did so by making very large charitable contributions to a variety of different charities, including Carter's various efforts. Jimmy Carter would fly on his plane frequently. They were close friends to the point where when this Abedi guy had a heart attack, Carter actually visited him in person in the hospital and intervened to get him better treatment and have him see his personal physicians and things. So that's how close of a relationship this guy had. But it turned out that under the surface, this supposedly legitimate bank that was operating in 78 countries was actually a massive, massive criminal conspiracy. And its primary objective was money laundering. And it touched everybody. You had cartels involved. You had like the Medellin cartel was involved in it. You had large individual countries like the Marcos family and who were stealing, billions of dollars out of their country, using this bank as a funnel. You have it touching arms dealers. It touches the Iran-Contra affair, and actually a lot of the money used in that scandal actually went directly through BCCI's coffers. Various other intelligence connections as well. It literally touched everyone. And the thing that was interesting about BCCI, once it was exposed in the early 90s, was that it turned out that a lot of people knew about this thing for a very long time. Even in the mid 80s, the deputy director of the CIA was referring to it as the bank of crooks and criminals, at the same time that the CIA was using it for their operations. And this, I know it sounds like conspiracy theory, but this is all very well documented. The Senate report by John Kerry's investigation into this demonstrates these relationships very conclusively. And that Senate report, often people say, is actually limited in its scope and in terms of what was actually revealed and what was really going on. So yeah, you have this international conspiracy that involves literally everyone that the regulators knew about and yet didn't do anything until they absolutely had to intervene. With involvement of many very prominent individuals, actually, they turned out that one of the other things that's a really interesting similarity between FTX and this scandal is that FTX recently had invested in a U.S. bank called Moonstone Bank. Previously it was called Farmington Bank, this tiny little bank in the middle of nowhere, and was moving tens of millions of dollars through it, apparently. It turns out that BCCI did something similar by taking over a bank in the 80s secretly, and then putting in charge of it a former Secretary of Defense, who was then operating to basically promote this bank in the US. So long and short of it is that this has happened before. This is not the first time something like this has happened. And that's, I think, kind of gives you, if you want to have a framework for understanding this, I think that's a good example of just how convoluted something like this can get. There are a lot of uses for cryptocurrency. Whether or not you believe in it as a world-changing thing, it can be used very, very effectively for moving money out of countries when they're not supposed to be moving money out of countries. So, yeah, I think that there's definitely a lot to be said for the theory that there's a massive conspiracy here.
So let's talk about this a bit more, and let's also be careful how we do it so that we don't, let's say, go over our skis and maybe not unnecessarily name people as we try and flesh this out a bit. One thing that I think both of us think is going on here is money laundering. And in general, we know money laundering. There are many examples in which I think criminally prosecuted cases of people using crypto for money laundering purposes. And a lot of companies and players in this space. The other thing, I should just mention this. I know we talked about Moonstone in my conversation with, at least in my recent conversation with CoffeeZilla, the head of Moonstone, or the chief digital officer, again, kind of a bullshit title, is Javier Chapelin, who is the son of Gene Chapelin, who created Inspector Gadget and who is the chairman of Deltec Bank, which is Tether's bank. The former general counsel of Deltec is now the attorney general of the Bahamas. These guys all have spent a fortune buying Bahamian real estate. And so it's clear to me that this criminal network, so to speak, or criminal conspiracy involves not just various companies, but also people who are in one way or another connected to governments. And so I was about to just go down the road of bringing up my concern about having Sam Bankman-Fried sitting in a jail in the Bahamas. But before we actually do that, let's go back to the conversation about money laundering. Money laundering, as I said, and evading capital controls, because that's another big one. And one of the other big connections that a lot of these firms have is with Hong Kong. Now, obviously, Hong Kong is a huge international financial center. But I'm curious, how do you feel that money laundering and capital control evasion factor in here? And how easy is it, based on what you've seen, do you think, to actually launder money and to evade capital controls using some of these companies that don't apply AML KYC?
Well, I can give you an excellent example based off of an article that I just published, as well as that was building off of work by the Financial Times, which incidentally has been an excellent resource during this entire scandal. And they've done better work than probably anybody. So it turns out that there was a company in Hong Kong called Genesis Block, which was very closely affiliated with FTX. And their business model was they were an over-the-counter cryptocurrency seller, buyer, and seller. And they would literally accept bags of cash and sell you crypto. And vice versa. You would buy your crypto for cash.
Using renminbi. When
whatever.
you say cash.
You walk up with bags of whatever, and they would take it.
When you say walk up with bags of cash, you mean literal cash, not bank deposits?
I mean literal bags of cash. This is based off of the Financial Times report from a few days ago, which I cited in my article, in addition to individuals I know in Hong Kong who know that this is actually standard for a lot of Hong Kong banks, that they don't really care too much about where the money comes from. But it turns out Genesis Block, which the FT article shows had some pretty close connections with FTX and Alameda. What I found was that in terms of blockchain connections, they are indistinguishable. That all of the cryptocurrency that was being purchased by Genesis Block from their customers was going directly to Alameda's addresses. And if you actually look at what Alameda was operating like during these periods of time, and remember, you have to just go back really quickly. Alameda bills itself as a hedge fund, right? They're a trading firm that's doing market making and other things in crypto. They don't build themselves as like a payment processor or an exchange. And yet, if you look at how their wallets behaved, they were acting like an exchange. They were basically taking in money and sending out money to all sorts of individuals and different parties. And it's billions of dollars. Billions and billions and billions of dollars. And so can I say how much of that is attributable just to Genesis Block and their businesses in Hong Kong? I can't, but I can say that it was a lot. And we have to remember too that FTX started in Hong Kong. They didn't start in the Bahamas. They only moved very recently to the Bahamas. So whatever Sam was doing, and then the other thing to remember too is that Sam always said, well, I made my money initially in the kimchi premium, which was the arbitraging the difference in value between Bitcoin in like Japan and Korea and the rest of the world. Of course, that difference existed because people were using this cryptocurrency to evade capital controls in both of those countries. So even then, he's admitting that his business was money laundering from day one, right? Like arbitrage here does not really mean arbitrage in the traditional financial sense.
Do we have any idea of how the cash portion worked? So like, let's say I'm a customer. I come up to Genesis Block, which is a front company for Alameda. I give them $10 million in renminbi cash. They in turn sell me some discounted amount of Bitcoin or something else because there's a VIG involved, right? Because that's the whole point. And so what do I do with the cash? Like, what do we know about how they actually use
like
that?
I said, from what and I'm not from Hong Kong, so I don't have any personal experience of this, but what I've been told by people that have done business over there, that it's not uncommon for banks in Hong Kong to just process large cash deposits and withdrawals without any problem. So, and I don't have enough visibility into this to speak to it with any kind of expertise, but my understanding is that these small local banks were kind of the first step. And then it ends up going to fairly large international banks. And I don't want to say specific names because I have no evidence, but the money travels up and up and up. And then it ends up in some places where some pretty big people might get in trouble for it, depending if people really want to follow the money here.
Yeah, totally. That's the other thing that I've always had this feeling whenever I've watched, because I got into this, I don't know how you got into all this, but I got into this rabbit hole by following the Twitter rabbit hole back in 2020. Yeah. And when I watched their CTO and their general counsel, and if you always want to find the most corrupt people in these organizations, you go straight to the compliance department. Yeah, you have to go straight to the compliance department. It's so obvious that they're lying. It's so obvious that they're going out of their way to be obtuse. But there was always just something about how they really didn't care. They just lied so effortlessly. And I always wondered, like, they lie like the kind of people who are totally not afraid of regulators and legal authorities because there's someone else that they answer to that's way scarier. And that person has a gun and operates extrajudiciously. I mean, do you have that same feeling as well?
Yeah, maybe. You're
same
getting
thing
into
with
a point where
the former. There was another guy who was, I think, the deputy head of Deltec Bank, who appeared on Laura Shin's podcast back, a couple of years ago. Same thing. He was kind of
Mr. Pepin
tweaking. Yeah, he was tweaking in his chair, and all these guys have gaming chairs, and just kind of spewing out all sorts of bullshit. It was so obvious that it was bullshit, And I just kept thinking, like, from a frame of mind perspective, what is the world that they live in? And what are the power structures that they identify with and the sources of retribution that they have to be concerned about? And I just felt like, these people act like criminals. They act like people who are like, I don't care if you arrest me. I'd rather not tell you anything because I know that I'm going to get shot in the head.
I mean, that's possible. The other thing to remember is that, or at least consider, is that people that get themselves involved in these types of frauds like Ponzi schemes and things typically do not have all that much forward thought in their heads, right? Like these are unsustainable scams, right? Like anybody gets themselves running a Ponzi, that if they recognize what they're doing, they know that it's going to go down eventually, right? Like there's no way to get out of it. So you have to be very capable of deluding yourself about what you're doing. So there's an element of that as well. And I think an element too of, well, we haven't gotten caught yet, so they're never going to catch us. And that's, I mean, if you think about, look at like any criminals like path, right? Like they start out small and get bigger and bigger until eventually they get caught, right? Like, so there's a combination of those things. But I mean, definitely there's no question here. There's no question here that this is a very small group of people, right? I mean, look at FTX touches everything. FTX touches Celsius Network. They touch Voyager. They touch BlockFi. They touch this company all the way over in Hong Kong. They touch entities that are very interesting and have some very interesting connections in Europe. They're doing business and buying banks with Deltec Bank in the United States. And they're tied in with Tether and Bitfinex and everything else. That's one big group of people. Whether or not Binance is directly involved. I mean, Binance was one of the earliest investors in FTX too, right? So like, it is a very small club.
Completely.
And who else is involved here? That's the part that's a little bit unclear.
Yeah, and that's where the conspiracies come from. So, it seems to me that in one way or another, what's a plausible possibility here is that Sam Bankman-Fried was kind of identified. He was marked as somebody that could be a really useful bagman, so to speak. I mean, he's not stupid. He's smart. His two parents are compliance lawyers. He clearly has like narcissistic tendencies, so much so that he completely incriminated himself by going on the circuit just to rehabilitate his reputation because he was so narcissistic. I don't know where Gary Wang comes in. I'm curious because Mark Cahotis brought him up. Of course, now, lots of people speculate about who Gary Wang is. It seems from the documents, I think I got this from either reading the SEC or the CFTC complaint, or maybe even reading the prepared statement of FTX's new CEO, who's in charge of overseeing the bankruptcy, that Yang was kind of the technical guy. He was tasked with sort of building out the infrastructure, and Sam Bankman-Fried was tasked with managing the trading operations back when they started Alameda and I think they started Alameda, was it 2019 or 2017?
2017.
2017. So
supposedly.
Supposedly.
So here's how I kind of look at this stuff. And this, again, is a little bit conspiratorial, but I don't think that far off.
No, but this is just to be clear. Like, they've already said that he's being charged with participating in a criminal conspiracy.
No. The criminal part of it's fine. But what I think of in terms of somebody like Sam or these other individuals, I've talked with people who have experience with other similar financial frauds where there's the underlying criminal element, which are people that are long-term, well-established organized crime, but always been criminals from day one. And then they end up getting a business with these highly educated front people who, for one reason or another, end up beholden to them. And the way I think about that, I think you're a fan of the mafia and the history of the mafia, right? The classic scam is the bust out. Right. So let's say you have a guy who runs a small business, and you get him into debt to you, say, because he likes to play poker a little too much. Right. And then he owes you all this money, and you say, well, I'm going to break your legs, or you're going to let me help you, like, use your business. I'm going to become a silent partner in your business. And then you go, okay, well, that's fine. I'll just give you a cut. But then they start doing all sorts of other things, like, using your small business, retail business as a front to fence stolen goods, or they start borrowing money using your credit, et cetera, et cetera. And then eventually they burn the business down and take the insurance money, right? To me, that's an excellent framework for understanding what happened with FTX. What I think is that if you look at what Sam was doing, I mean, there's evidence as far as back, I think, early 2019 that's come out where he was looking for investors in Alameda. And the pitch was that, and this is documented, like there's actual copies of these agreements that they were offering people. And the pitch was that you give us money, we'll pay you, I think it was 15% annualized returns. And there is no risk, zero risk. It literally says it in the document, zero risk. Now, obviously, to anybody who finds financial fraud interesting, that's almost certainly some type of Ponzi, right? Like somebody who's incredibly desperate for money. So he was desperate for money years ago. And what you have to wonder is, who did he turn to for money? And then what did they want back from him? And I think that's probably what happened here. I think he left this trading company he worked at, And maybe he got in over his head and screwed up because maybe he wasn't as good of a trader as he thought he was. There's some evidence of that too. When he was on BitMEX and his trading records, he was losing a ton of money, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And that's known. Again, he's admitted to that. He said, well, that was just my personal account. It doesn't matter. So maybe what happened here was that Sam just was not very good at being a trader and ended up in hock to some people who said, hey, this guy could be useful. And then
100%.
4 years later, here he is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I actually have the same sense of it. And they probably really exploited his ego, told him that he was going to be, some big shot. They were going to help him. And then, you bring in the whole Tether thing. And this is the last thing I want to bring up before we kind of maybe focus in on speculating on where things go from here, because I do want to ask you about that or have a conversation about it. But, the question of Tether keeps coming up. I don't know when and how this will ever get resolved, what we will learn, because again, so many people in the industry just haven't cared. And to be fair, when the Luna collapse happened, it looked like Tether's peg might come unglued, and it didn't. But if Tether is operating a money printer, that's a really powerful liquidity engine to bootstrap companies in the space. If you're operating a conspiracy and you have a money printer, that's pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's exactly what's happening here, yeah.
Yeah. So an amazing story to continue to follow. James, where do you think things play out from here? We mentioned Binance. So I said that they had suspended withdrawals. You said that they had reinstated them. There is, of course, a distinction to be made between a liquidity crisis and a solvency crisis. A liquidity crisis can turn an otherwise solvent institution, especially if it's a financial institution, to become insolvent, even if they were, let's say, borderline, even if they were, not taking excessive levels of risk or certainly not being reckless with their money. So I do want to just emphasize that it is possible that there are companies that were otherwise above board shops that can get caught up in what's happening here. But we have Binance. DCG, of course, kind of looks like it's on life support.
It's a smoking crater.
Yeah. So What are the companies that are teetering right now, do you think?
So to briefly talk about DCG, I've written a small article about them. That's a smoking crater as far as I'm concerned.
Please remind people give them your Substack again.
It's Dirty Bubble Media at substack.com.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so Digital Currency Group, which was run by a fairly prominent cryptocurrency advocate named Barry Silbert, who's been in this business since, I think, 2014. Turns out that they were making these massive intercompany loans, investing them in things like buying their own stock back, buying their Grayscale product, which is this Bitcoin trust that's publicly traded, and making other venture investments that are likely zeros. This company is well over $1 billion in the hole, and it doesn't appear to have the money to pay it back. And that hurts a lot of people because, among other things, the Winklevoss twins, had entrusted all of their Gemini company's Earn product, which was basically this lending product that their customers could access, hundreds of millions of dollars, I think it's $900 million or something, was all sent to this DCG essentially for management. So that's gone. So that takes out another exchange, or destroys their reputation at the very least. And then, Binance has a lot of liquidity if they've done these reserves reports where they release all of their wallets and show you how much crypto they have. So the first point I'd like to make is they do have a lot of liquidity. The second point I'd like to make is that they're very open and willing to share what their assets are, but they seem to have a hard time telling everybody what their liabilities are. And they say, well, that's a little bit harder to figure out. Well, realistically, they should have that number, because they're insisting that they're solvent. So if they know they're solvent, they must know approximately how much they owe people. And yet they won't share that information. So that's a problem. And then the other problem is that even if, let's say, Binance was above board in a financial sense and that they actually are solvent, which I think is questionable to say the least, the fact is that they face a number of investigations for criminal activity in the United States and other countries that extend from everything from money laundering and tax evasion to violating sanctions with like the Iranian government. So they face some pretty serious hurdles in the few months coming ahead. And what happens from here, I can't say, but all I can say is Binance is half of the crypto market in terms of volume. So in terms of who else goes down, I was asked this question a few weeks ago on Odd Lots.
I didn't realize that you were on the Odd Lots podcast.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, yeah.
Oh, what a coincidence.
Yeah, one of the hosts, I think it was Tracy, asked me, who goes down next? And my answer, this was before Digital Currency Group got in trouble or announced they were as serious trouble as they were, I think. My answer was everyone. And that made them laugh a little bit. But I'm serious. Because the first order effects, we can't even know. We don't know who is in hock to who yet. The FTX creditor list is still redacted. So we don't know who was exposed there. We know that major players like Jump Trading is apparently in trouble. What was the one? There was another big trading firm. The name of it's escaping me now, where one of the founders of it recently died at the age of 30, just in his sleep, supposedly.
Right, MakerDAO. No, not in his sleep. MakerDAO drowned.
Amber Group.
Yeah.
Amber Group suddenly is apparently having a lot of issues with paying back people. That's a very large trading company, apparently, and that's based out of Asia. I think all of them are in a very precarious financial position to begin with. And the point I've been trying to make, too, is that it doesn't even matter if they have a direct exposure to something like FTX. It's the indirect effect of everyone suddenly losing confidence in the confidence scheme. And everyone's saying, well, wait a minute, we're trusting these guys with our money, and we don't even know where it is, and we don't know what they're doing with it. And if it turns out that Sam Bankman-Fried, who was one of the most prominent people in the space, who had his name on everything, who was talking in front of Congress and on, CNBC and everything else, if it turns out that guy's lying to us, then who else is lying to us? And that's the effect that I think is more important and going to have more of a consequence.
100%. Absolutely. So also about the observation about people mysteriously dying, whether they're in their sleep or swimming in some part of Puerto Rico, I think that it's weird to me that no one has raised concerns. I don't really see people kind of raising concerns about SBF safety in this prison in the Bahamas. Are you concerned? Shouldn't we be concerned? Isn't it important that the guy's lost billions of dollars at the very least, even if there isn't a conspiracy within the Bahamian government to whack the guy? Isn't it possible that there are people outside of that prison system who are so angry that they've had their money stolen and because they're criminals that they're going to have the guy killed?
It's absolutely possible. I have said a few times, I think on Twitter, that Sam will be lucky to go to prison.
Totally.
But who knows? Maybe he's more useful as a fall guy than he is anything else. I don't know. But I guess we'll see.
There were so many people that were banking at FTX.
Well, and that's the thing.
He took so many people's money.
Yeah. If they offered him a deal and he took it, he could take down a lot of people, I would think. They look at Tether, right? That's a great example. He did business with them for years. That's a very good example. And whoever is behind that, he's dangerous.
No doubt about that too, right? No doubt about that too. But I just mean on a very basic, visceral level of there are people that are capable of exacting revenge who aren't even part of some conspiratorial thing. And you've lost a lot of people, a lot of money, and you're just holed up in some. First of all, he was in his apartment in the Bahamas all these days. And I thought that was concerning. I was like, I hope he has a private security detail to protect him. So I don't know. I think it's kind of crazy. Listen, James, this was awesome, man.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Again, tell people again where you blog and what your Twitter handle is.
So my Twitter handle is at Mike Burgersberg. And then my Substack is Dirty Bubble Media at Substack. So
I don't know if I mentioned this at the top, James, but I'm going to be doing a number of these conversations going forward because the situation with FTX is kind of, with my show, what I like to do is do a lot of prep, create an outline, think things through, and create conversations that are clearly value additive for people. And one of my concerns has been with the story that in order to add value, it's got to be timely because stuff's changing constantly. But you run the risk, of course, of doing something and turning around right away and kind of putting a lot of stuff out where you don't actually provide anything new or you don't kind of do thoughtful analysis. What I wanted to do here so that people understand kind of where I was coming from this conversation is I wanted to give people a kind of different perspective and kind of a sense of a lot of the unknowns that a lot of people are working through because of the fact that there is a criminal conspiracy here, as we know from official filings. To the extent of the conspiracy is unknown, but you've got to kind of put your tinfoil hat on a little bit here in order to think critically, which is not something I'm normally comfortable doing. So I thank you very much, Dr. Block. It was great having you on here. Thank you for your research, and I encourage everyone to check out your Substack.
Great, thanks. I appreciate it. It's great talking to you.
For more information about this week's episode, or if you want easy access to related programming, visit our website at hiddenforces.io and subscribe to our free email list. If you want access to full episodes, transcripts, and intelligence reports, which include additional notes, resources, links, and other material that will help you get the most out of each and every episode, check out our premium subscription, available through the Hidden Forces website at hiddenforces.io/subscribe. Today's episode was produced by me and edited by Stylianos Nicolaou. For more episodes, you can check out our website at hiddenforces.io. Join the conversation on Twitter at hiddenforcespod, or send me an email at info@hiddenforces.io. As always, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.